actually with a very special guest here in the studio. Dr. Cayce Myers from Virginia Tech joins us to talk a little bit about some current events, some headlines that are going on right now in the United States. Dr. Myers, thanks so much for rejoining us here on Live Impact News. How's everything going with you this week?
Going well. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. And at the top of the list for sort of headlines here in the United States is everything happening at airports across the country. You have a unique confluence of events. Obviously, the funding lapse for the Department of Homeland Security has led to TSA workers not getting paid, which in turn has led to many calling out. That has resulted in Donald Trump sending ICE officers to various airports throughout the country to try and fill in some of the gaps, reportedly, of that TSA work. All of this comes as the spring times arrive. Spring break is here. It is a heavy travel period. And of course, there are energy concerns when it comes to the war in Iran and how those could impact air travel. You wrap all of that in with a tragedy at LaGuardia Airport yesterday, and it has just been a really, really tumultuous time for airports here across the country. Let's start with ICE workers being sent to airports to sort of help mitigate some of the loss of TSA agents. When you hear news like that, with everything, with all of the context that goes into the role ICE agents have played in this country over the last 6 to 10 months, and now they're headed to airports to help supplement TSA work, what's just your first impression of that news?
Well, I'm not surprised by it. I think that one of the issues that you have in the TSA realm is that we see so many call outs and some resignations over not being funded and not being paid. And if you look at that across the country, it's a pretty sizable percent. I saw a percentage earlier today reported out just under like 12%. But if you go to some airports and look at some of these high volume airports, it's several times that number that may not be at work. And so what that results in is these slower times, these slower processing times, people having to wait in long lines at the airport to make a flight. And so what ICE agents are brought in there to do, because they were funded a little bit differently over the summer in the big beautiful bill, and so they were brought in to kind of alleviate this. They're alleviating it in a very particular way. And so they're not TSA agents. They're not trained that way. So it is going to be a little bit different in terms of just what their role is there. Again, I don't know in long term, it has not totally eradicated this wait time issue that's been going on. Now, the politics of it are significant because the politics have resulted in some people saying that they are, they're apprehensive with all the ICE agents around. There's been criticism around ICE writ large. And there's also this political issue of masking. So they're unmasked at the airport, which kind of brings back this conversation that's been going on around ICE reform. So it's a political statement, but it's also, there's a practical side to it, just given the fact that travel has slowed down so much.
And there seems to be, there's an irony baked in where the reason the DHS is not funded right now is because of demands that Democrats have made when it comes to how ICE polices and how ICE carries out their operations. Like you said, face masks, body cameras, things of that nature. And now they're being brought in to supplement the holes that have been left by that lack of funding in DHS. When you see this sort of closed loop system, is there anything that says about the times we're living in? This just sort of bizarre, almost whack-a-mole situation that has arisen when it comes to DHS and ultimately air travel.
Well, I think it's an interesting political time. I think that what you're seeing is the ripple effects of politics and political issues, shutdowns becoming more common as they become political leverage to get, reforms. In this case, ICE reforms, but other reforms as well. I think that the other thing that you're seeing here is, I think, a larger conversation around how government works. Government is designed to work in a particular way where you're funded. TSA agents, they're trained in a different way than ICE agents. They do fundamentally sort of different jobs. And so one of the things is that, is this replacement really an alleviation, or is this something that complicates matters further? And those experiences for travelers, I think, is something that has created a high level of frustration. Interestingly enough, though, on the DHS funding side, and we saw this in the last shutdown, when these funding and services kind of cease to exist and we start seeing the ripple effect to everyday travelers, to people just trying to use government services, that oftentimes creates a political inflection point that then kind of pushes a resolution forward. A lot of times in the beginning of these shutdowns is very abstract, like how is this really going to impact people? But as these services diminish, that we really do see that impacting the day-to-day lives of regular citizens.
And, to your point, we have seen reporting this morning that Congress is working towards a solution that would fund TSA workers and without funding necessarily some of the enforcement and removal operations that we have seen from ICE. So, as you said, this situation may be compelling elected officials to go and try and get this done, creating those elevated stakes to go ahead and find that funding. You mentioned TSA and what those workers do every day and how other officers going into airports are not necessarily trained in the same way. Are you able to sort of further illuminate what TSA workers do that can't be easily replaced? I mean, there are so many specifics to their jobs that they train for. I mean, how difficult is it to step in as an untrained airport worker and keep things running smoothly in what at times can be a very chaotic environment?
Well, it's just my impression, but I think that one of the biggest challenges would be, the nature of the TSA agent is that they're outward facing with customers going into airports and having flights. And my understanding is that the ICE agents are brought in to do a limited job, really around security. But again, these are different jobs altogether. And they're also with the TSA agents. I mean, again, those processing times becoming longer and longer and longer as these wait times. There's the ripple effect about showing up to your flight on time, and so there's a real impact there for the traveler. And again, there's a growing frustration, I think, amongst federal workers, particularly now we see with the DHS, where they're going weeks without pay. Obviously, there's a personal impact on them and their families that way, and having missed checks and missed pay. And so, again, I think there's a growing frustration amongst them as that they feel like they're kind of caught in this political kind of tension between Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and they end up being kind of, government workers in general become kind of the sort of the people that are the most affected, but may not actually be involved in the actual controversy. So this, as you mentioned, the DHS issue is really about ICE and are really about ICE reforms, not about TSA or any of the other numerous workers that work in the DHS.
Right, and it's TSA that continues to bear so much of the consequences of this shutdown. TSA workers used as a political pawn here more frequently than I can remember. Is that how you see it as well? In that obviously they're now just kind of being, their suffering is something that can be used as a political tool, and that has become a part of this mechanism of Congress as they try to. Everyone tries to gain an advantage in getting their legislation passed and their prerogatives through.
I certainly think there's a sentiment within the federal workforce that they feel like oftentimes they are bearing the brunt of these political issues within Congress, particularly around shutdowns. And the other thing is that the appetite for shutdowns has grown amongst politicians. And so we had shutdowns in the shutdown in the 90s that was quite long. And then there seemed to be just sort of a political disinclination to use that as a tool for leverage. And now we're seeing that used more frequently because in a system like we have, where we have these razor thin majorities in Congress, and you have to have 60 votes to get budgets passed and things like that. The shutdowns become the kind of the tool of those who are in the minority party to get leverage, and this is being used by Republicans and Democrats. Again, it seems to also not have had the same kind of shock value that it had when we first kind of saw these shutdowns used as a political leverage that we saw in the 90s and in some of the early 2000s. Now this seems more commonplace, and I think those in the federal service do feel disproportionately affected, and oftentimes, there are dire personal consequences when you don't have paychecks, you don't have income, and yet many of these workers are required to go to work and work without pay, and of course they get back pay later. But again, that is a difficult challenge, and there's I think, a growing frustration amongst them. And again, also on essential services where you have people that need to utilize government services, they have to travel. We're going into a high travel month, and we'll be going into more high travel months as we get into the summer. The impact of that is significant, and the impact on the everyday traveler is significant. So I think that there is a quite a frustration amongst those who are working in this kind of political environment where it seems that this has become just a normalized political reality.
And we talk about how the populace views these government shutdowns and how the shock value has kind of lessened since maybe the 90s or the early 2000s. And when I try to sort of just observe and examine why that might be, obviously it's become normalized. Anything you have more, anytime you have more of something, it's sort of easier to stomach, I suppose, in theory. I also wonder if perhaps there's a general numbness to the populace based on some of the sort of elevated nastiness that we've seen in politics over the last 8 to 12 years or so, and maybe even stretching a little bit beyond. And then maybe a part of me wonders if perhaps you have a populace that is maybe more educated than ever, and so they understand that this is simply a mechanism of negotiation, and they're better able to sort of, separate and understand why certain things are happening based on their own political inclinations. I'm just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it sticks. Do you see an underlying reason for why people are more willing to accept a government shutdown here in 2026?
I think it's a combination of all the things that you mentioned. Prior to the 1980s, this was not a political reality. There were not government shutdowns that occurred, and so as it became a political reality and became a kind of a realization, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years, we're seeing kind of this normalization of it as a political tool. And that may be more accepted by the public because of the polarization that we see within society. It may be accepted by the public just because they're desensitized to it. I think there is a certain question, though, politically speaking, has always been a shutdown is won and lost. A party pays a price because it's who's at fault, who caused the shutdown. Is this a Republican shutdown or is this a Democratic shutdown? And I don't know that that's necessarily the case anymore because the political consequence of it doesn't seem to have resulted in a change in the behavior. So again, I don't know that desensitization to it really leads to one group kind of paying a political price for it. And as a result, I think you're going to see more of this continue in the future.
Yeah, and as we've seen, it'll be those TSA workers and other federal workers that kind of end up really truly suffering when it comes to their actual bank accounts and livelihoods. Last question I'll ask you. We're actually watching on our board of live feeds as Markwayne Mullin is confirmed here by President Trump and sort of introduced as the next secretary of the DHS. Is that something that you think could provide a meaningful difference into finding some solutions to this issue?
Well, I certainly think that this is all just sort of coming together. All of these issues are coming together seemingly in one day. We also hear that there may be a resolution or an agreement in the Senate today as well on this DHS funding. Well, that remains to be seen. But certainly leadership has something to do with kind of these ongoing discussions, particularly around ICE reforms. And I think that this is going to be potentially, we may be at the end of this particular issue. But again, I don't think that it's going to be going away anytime soon. I think that this is going to continue to be a protracted and polarizing issue, particularly in a midterm election here.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Dr. Myers, we can't tell you how much we appreciate you kind of coming in and giving us some context and some insight. Is there anything else you want to add before we let you go?
I think we covered it all. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Myers. That's Cayce Myers from Virginia Tech coming in to help us sort out this issue a little bit today. And you heard he mentioned there in his last answer the confluence of events that we're experiencing right now in regards to air travel